Today I want to talk about Peter Dabrock, the head of the Ethics Council of Germany, or the Ethics Soviet of Germany. He is interviewed by the Zeit and has crazy things to say. But before I begin, I want to say how I first became aware of these strange ethics Soviets. And that was when I was still a feminist, when I still was on the political left back in the Schröder years. Back then, there was research into embryonal cells, and the Koreans, of all people, all these atheists, rallied against it and warned not to play God. In this context, I heard the first time of an ethics council that somehow decides what we should do and what we should not do, and what is moral and what is virtuous. It is, of course, not only the Koreans that were in this council, but also representatives of the trade unions, the churches, and so on. What I had a problem with was the entire idea of the moral of the people being set by a council, because I had been raised in the illusion that democracy is the system in which we, the people, set our rules through discussion, through a meaningful debate on what is a good behavior and what isn't, and what should be regulated with law and what should be regulated maybe without law or should not be regulated at all. That was my conception, and when I heard about this anti-embryo research fight as a feminist who was pro-choice back then, I'm still largely pro-choice, but I have a more nuanced view in total. I was a bit set back, and when the Queens were rallying against genetic manipulation of crops like corn or something like that, I thought there is nothing wrong with research, there's nothing wrong with science. Why is the left so anti-science? The interview is then about a study in the United States of America conducted by a private business where they have rejuvenated 9 individuals. They claim that because some black hair grew back on older men, they had reverted the entire clock, the biological clock in the cells, and that this might be a major medical breakthrough. Normally, a study with only 9 individuals is not really worth the paper it is printed on, but they ignore it, and the interview is then really about the hypothesis of rejuvenating men and what it means for society at large. As you can imagine, there were 9 men as a sample case. So the first inequality they detect is that medicine is first tested with men very often, and then women are just giving smaller doses. The explanation is always the patriarchy, and that everything in society seems to serve the man, despite our lower life expectancy. And they do not take into account that men are just more daring and more risk-taking, and that taking part in experiments and being curious in the outer world and research as such, and the new land and so on, is just something that men are usually built to do. But anyway, so this is the premise of the interview. They are digging into research again, and the Ethics Council is in its anti-science fight. So he sees 2 areas of inequality, namely the social inequality and the generational inequality. So the social inequality is that people in countries that behave badly because they are Muslim or they are communist don't look after their children very well, do not look into educating them, have a hard time to use contraception, create like hell, and die early. While there are countries where people behave well, look after their children, look into education, accrue wealth, and live a long and happy life. And to balance these 2 different life experiences off, and to create some equality, those people in the richer countries that behave better must die. The generational argument is that if people become very old and with a sustainable long health, they can take position of powers for very long. They can occupy these positions and then direct the course of society against the interest of the next generation that do not really get their hands on the jobs. And he actually brings the argument that the old white men are so evil that they must die to make place for the Greta Thunbergs, because they are morally superior and the younger generation must take power. And this is something Maoists bring up again and again. And people often forget that Mao Zedong riled up the youth against the elder generation and killed a lot of teachers and intellectuals along the way. From there sprang the hippie movement in the West, which is hardly ever acknowledged. But the Cold War was actually lost in Woodstock. The entire anti-Vietnam propaganda started with a music festival and with, dumbing down the entire message. It was no longer about the actual facts and what is going on in Vietnam and what is going on in the Soviet Union. But it was about love and peace, and you can have drugs. We give you gulags and everything that is taking away your power, but you get free sex and free drugs. So we are for freedom, right? Sex and drugs, so we are for the freedom. And that really chimed well with the youth because young people are very easily manipulative. And this is why the left is also now riling up the young people again. They know that the governments, the authorities have a stronger impact on young people with impressionable minds. The older generation was just discredited for their very age. This is what Maoists have achieved because they know the younger generation can always be manipulated in the interest of the power elites, while elderly people who have accrued some life experience, some knowledge, and also some material wealth have some resistance to offer against the whims of a tyrant. And this is, of course, not what a tyrant wants. Right Online offers the argument that the stronger longevity of our lifespans would result in a higher concentration of CO2 in the air and therefore change the climate. In this brave new world, the group who have already been faced with this argument usually suggests that the generations or the children will be coming later and fewer anyway, so the entirety of mankind will remain fairly stable. However, he says that it is against human nature, which is quite interesting because it is it gives a bit way to the conservative thinking. And he says that humans want to procreate, they want to have babies, and as a consequence, you would need a strong regulation to stop that. To stop them to have babies at an early age and to proliferate the procreation. So he expects that the environment will be polluted with too many people because of the exponential growth, and people will not be stopped from having children unless there will be a tyranny telling them. This is basically the Aldous Huxley view of the world. He also comes with this weird shame argument that somehow seems to bother the left, even though they are the masters of shaming everybody else, and that is a botched CV would result in more dissatisfaction. He says that in the long term, and I actually agree with that, in the long term we all have a botched CV, it all looks crappy, we do not look competitive anymore, and therefore we end up in misery when we have a long life. What he does not take into account is that the morals just could change and that we may just become a bit more accepting of different CVs and just look a bit better at the actual skill sets that can be applied to a given job. For me, it is just a matter of acquaintance, of getting used to it. Or the left is somehow worried about their communist president who stopped taking part in the who stopped taking part in everyday business because they believe they are so superior and hate every single product for some hair in the soup, and who have secluded themselves voluntarily, that these people have no way back to live in shame. And I mean, it's weird enough that he even suggests that death would be better for these communists than to live long. I mean, oh my goodness. And then he dabbles in religion and how we try to create an afterlife basically already on Earth. Life expectancy doubled since the Middle Ages, and he says that a lifespan of 200 years would basically make us immortal, like how the ancient people would have called basically their deities. They were the mortals and they were the gods, right? So where he veers into is really a spiritual argument, and this is what troubles me a lot, and what really sets me on that path, that anti-leftist path, even when I was on the left and I had my run-in with the anti-genetic manipulation and anti-embryo research campaigns. And that is this Mary Shelley anti-science stuff. They, on the one hand, hate God in everything that has to do with him. They hate the institutions, the Catholic Church. I mean, now they have fraternized with this church because they have marched through the institution and have basically infiltrated it. But they are polemicized against the churches still, and do everything against our Christian, Judeo-Christian heritage. But at the same time, they use this phrase, do not play God. So there is a reference for some spiritual being that they fear is somehow limited by the inference of human technology into the realm of what is the God's right to manage. So the entire anti-scientific argument really is based on a spiritual idea that we cannot raise machines into Frankenstein monsters, cannot manipulate genes, the foundational building blocks of life, and we must not play with a nuclear power. That's another one. That's another anti-science movement, and it all seems to congregate in one particular party that is now very strong in Europe, particularly in Germany, and that is the Green Party. They combine basically all these anti-science narratives, all these anti-science ideas. And I think really what we see is at its very core the suppression of the smart people by the dumb people. And I think this is shining through here. A sane person would say, you know what, if somebody can live long, great for him, just grant it. And it's also part of the Ten Commandments. Do not envy your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, etc. Don't envy your neighbor's life expectancy, or at least do not crave. You know what I mean? Do not try to destroy it just for the sake of equality. That is what the Ten Commandments suggest, and the left cannot have that. They are basically anti-Torah. And at the same time, they have a reference for the realm of the gods that may not be inferred with scientific research. And for me, this is a return to paganism. It is there is some anti-Christian, anti-Jewish habitus on the political left, but at the same time, they are building a religion of their own, a reference for something that doesn't exist, for a ghostly existence of some deities, and an immortal human being is therefore a threat for everybody who is a low life who is a moron. So that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.